Good afternoon, everybody. I have just been thinking about wealth and our tax system. I just can't stop thinking about it. And I want to come back to a podcast that I was listening to, the Remnant podcast with Jonah Goldberg, where they're talking about this from what I think is a mainstream Republican, and even a lot of mainstream Democrats, I think, feel this way about the issue. And I really disagree. And I want to start with actually, I've been charting, what is the question of what really is our disparity in wealth in our country? What does that look like? Well, I've graphed it out. And, as I was doing the math, I'm aware of the issue, but even I was kind of shocked with just how stark it is. Okay, this is what it looks like when you chart it out. And I don't see many charts like this on the internet, and I'm not sure why, but you can see for yourself. The 10% of folks, up to 15% of folks have negative wealth, so they owe money, and less than 50% of people have $100,000 of wealth. Half of our country has more than $100,000 worth of wealth, each individual, and half does not. 25% or so have $5,000 or less to their name. And let me just take a step back and say that these calculations were not, I had to piece some things together. We don't have data. We have family wealth data, but we don't have individual wealth data. So I've had to do some calculations in order to get to these numbers that were usable for this purpose. And if you are interested in how I did it, I'll show you how I did it. Going back to this chart, it's a really steep hike. And to address what these guys are talking about, they're asking, like, well, why do we care so much about the 99%? Well, we care because this is where the money is. So when you tax, think about taxing. What reason do we have to tax people anywhere in here? There's nothing here. There's nothing here to tax. These people need this money just to survive. This is where the money is. And when you look at what percentage of the wealth these folks are paying in taxes currently, it's not even close to being proportional. So, and this is almost too ridiculous to even comprehend. I have another chart that zooms in a little bit, but it's still like it looks exactly the same. So this chart is going up to the top is 10 billion. So we got about 1,000 individuals who have $10 billion worth of wealth or more in this country. Total wealth of the country, by the way, is 100 billion, roughly, is what they estimate. So the total wealth that all individuals in the United States have is about, I said 100 billion, 100 trillion, 100 trillion. Okay, so this graph goes down to 10 million at the top. And even here you can see, you don't even see any lift off the total bottom until you get to the 65th percentile or so. Okay, so when you're taxing people down here, we're talking about these people have peanuts comparatively. The majority of Americans, they have nothing. And so then you think about like paying for gas, paying for heating oil, and what those costs are for the majority of people in this country. You have to like move things around. You have to totally plan for this, because if you don't, you're gonna be in the red. But for a small percentage of people, they don't even have to think about that. They don't think twice about that. That means nothing to them. It's such a low percentage of their wealth that it's like, so then you're telling me you have the one person that has to really be concerned about the very, very basic amenities versus a very small percentage of people that it's it's no bother at all. These everyday decisions they're not decisions because it's just taken for granted. So I want to listen. I want to listen on to this, and at the end of this, I'm going to come back to. I'm not going to just complain about this. I actually have a proposal. We're going to tax wealth at a graduated rate, and we're going to do this so that we can get about $7 trillion of revenue per year. The current size of the government is we take in close to 4 trillion in taxes every year. Well, I'm going to increase this to 7,000 so that we can get we can get Medicare for all. We can get more for education, more for housing. We can have pre-K, and we can have healthcare, Medicare for all. We can have pre-K covered, and we can have a certain stipend for post high school education for everybody, and debt forgiveness. You may also be able to do some with universal basic income or a freedom dividend. And this is even assuming that we're going to keep all of their spending the same, though I think there could be plenty of cuts that could be made. And matter of fact, let me just explain this really quickly before I go into addressing and going back to what Jonah Goldberg's talking about. So this is the basic breakdown for those who have, and one thing that would be different, there's not just cutoff points. No, it's proportional. There's an algorithm that you could formulate based on how much money you actually wanted to take in, and this could be adjusted. Say you wanted to keep the government the same way, but you wanted to shift to taxing wealth. You could change the numbers a little bit, but use the basic structure of the algorithm and make it whatever you need. But if you wanted 7 billion, if you wanted 7 trillion per year, this is how you would do it, by taxing wealth. And you're going to be really interested to see how this goes. And I think for the majority of Americans, this should be very popular. If you don't want to pay as much in taxes, here you go. So for those who have wealth, individuals who have wealth at 20,000 to 200,000 per in holdings, you're going to pay 0.01% of that in taxes every year. Okay, so that is covering more than half of people right there. More than half of Americans are going to pay 0.01% of their wealth in taxes every year. That's on the higher end of folks that are in the 200,000 range. That's far, far less than they're paying in taxes. And the same is true for up until we get to like the 5 or 10%. So anybody who's making clear distinction, anybody who has total assets that add up to 200,000 to 2 million, you pay 1% of that in wealth, in taxes every year. And going up to those who have wealth of 2 million up to 20 million, you're going to pay 5%. 200 million to 2 billion, 17%. 2 billion to 20 billion, 22%. And 20 billion or more, you're going to pay 30%. And another distinction, all money owned above those cutoff rates, that's what you would pay. So the person who has 20 billion in total wealth holdings, the first The first 200,000 of that is going to get taxed at the same exact rate. It's going as everybody else, which is 0.01%. It's only, and you go down and tax each rate, each amount at that rate. It's only the monies above 20 billion that are going to get taxed at that 30% rate. And this is really important because we're talking about, AOC has a proposal for, and a lot of the progressive wing is looking to have an income tax that is at this graduated rate. And that's what this is. That's what this is. It's graduated taxes. That's what it means. It's not that you're taxing billionaires all of their money or all of their income at 70%, which they're saying as high as 70%. I don't even think you need to do that. But where I differ is that we need to figure out how to do wealth, because if you're not taxing wealth, then you're not really talking about anything. Because income, when you tax income, this is what it does. The more of the burden is put on the upwardly mobile. So if you have somebody who's making the American dream happen, they're really poor and they, by whatever means, are able to accumulate wealth because they picked themselves up by their bootstraps. They worked really hard and they did a job that made a lot of money, which some people do that. And that is fantastic. And yes, in America, you can do that probably. You can make that argument that you can do that in America more than anywhere else in the world or any time in history. Maybe that's true. That might be true. And I think that's awesome. But the fact still remains. You can look at these charts and you can see where we are. And these guys are going to make the argument here. Let's just listen in.
Big peeves is that in America, which is a great problem to have, but it's still a problem, we only talk about poverty as a subjective matter, right? Our definition of poverty is the definition of wealth for most of human history, for most poor people around the globe. The material prosperity that your average poor person has access to is considered quite lavish by objective historical or global standards. And so when Beto says that wealth has never been more concentrated today, if you have an objective understanding of what wealth is, or even a subjective one, the idea that wealth is more concentrated in a few people's hands today than it was, say, at the end of the 19th century, never mind the 17th century, 14th century, just strikes me as ludicrous, right? Particularly if you don't think about it in financial terms, but you think about size of homes, access to plumbing, access to sufficient calories, access, like a Mercedes in 1970, the equipment that it had and the features that it had would make it basically the lowest form of Hyundai today, if that, right? And so if you think about wealth in terms of your access to material resources, your ability to travel, your ability to flourish, your ability to eat well, and all the rest, wealth has never been less concentrated in the United States or anywhere than it is today. Am I wrong about that?
No, I think that.
Okay, he actually was correct on everything until he made the last point, which was wealth has never been less concentrated as it is today. Or it's more dispersed today than it ever has been. And that's where he took a big leap there. And because that's just not true. I mean, look at those charts there. That's not even close. That's not even close to being dispersed evenly. And it's true. One thing that's true is that we just have, by some measures, you can say we just have more wealth. And yes, people are generally not starving in this country, and not in the same way that people usually would starve, which is they just straight didn't have anything to eat. But I think to say that is being evenly handed out, this increase in wealth, this prosperity that we have as a nation and even as a globe, because global hunger in the last 40 years has been cut, so low, which is incredible. It's incredible. But you certainly cannot say that wealth is being handed out at even close to a rate that matches like merit and the ability level of people, the capacity they have to support themselves. I really don't believe that at all.
I mean, if you kind of accept the sensibilities of the left around wealth concentration, then you look at some of the statistics, so the share of wealth held by the top 0.1% or something like that. You see that has been going up for sure over the last several decades, no question about that. But that it is not as high as it was a century ago. Mm-hmm. If you want to go back further than a century ago, then the data are even more difficult to work with. But it's very hard to imagine that it's higher today than it was in the Gilded Age, and certainly to your point, if you go back to kind of feudal England or something like that, then it looks even sillier.
I wish I could have. You just got to listen to their podcast and listen to all of the arguments that they make, and it's just really interesting to me because I don't want to be. It's almost like, well, we're not feudal England, so what are you complaining about? I thought we wanted to be great, and that's what I want. And it seems like this system that we have right now, if that is what it's creating this almost impossible slope to draw on a map. Then also considering that, we don't have people starving. And everybody has a car, everybody has a cell phone, everybody has a toilet. Well, not everybody, but most people do. But we still have so many people who are struggling, really struggling they may have those basic needs met, but many of their other basic needs are not met. And they have to work. A lot of people have to work the 3 jobs and do the 80-hour work week just to be able to scrape by in this country that has so much wealth. And we're saying, oh, we can't pay for Medicare for all. We can't pay for kids to go to college. We can't even pay for kids to get a good high school education, primary education. We just don't. How are we going to pay for it? We have $100 trillion in wealth in this country. $100 trillion. You saw the graphs. You see where it is. It's in the hands of a very small number of people. And I'm not attacking them. I'm not attacking them insofar as, that I think that they're evil and I want to see them punished. No, that's not what I want. I just want an equitable system. And in order to do that, you have to tax wealth. You have to tax it at a graduated rate. And if you do so, you're going to be able to bring in a lot of revenue and you're going to disturb the markets. You're going to have a more capitalistic system if you do it that way. If you just give people the basics of what they need, especially children, you give them health care, you make sure that they have a really good education and get everything that they need up until the point where they're going to be going into the job market. And even there, you support people in transition because there's going to be a lot of transition. You put money behind those programs and you organize it, you fund it centrally, you collect centrally, and then you can disperse to states. The states can run a lot of these programs, but the taxation's got to come federally. It's got to be organized so that all of America is covered on this. There's the same standard for all Americans. It's the same basic standard of living. Because when you have people right now who can't even buy, healthy food at Shaw's, They're certainly not going to be able to participate in the economy, and they're just not going to be economic actors. And we have half the country right now that's hardly economic actors. So, but this can all be equalized a little bit by organizing around a few federal programs, and it will free up so much of the problems for private entities and individual families.